Thank you, and welcome everybody. I hope you've been enjoying the Woods Hole Film Festival so far. As Jay mentioned, this is the 29th Woods Hole Film Festival. Generally, the festival happens the last Saturday of July through the first Saturday of August, and is an in-person event right here in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, where we are located. This year, in the middle of March, when the COVID pandemic hit, it became clear that we were not going to be able to have the traditional festival that we have had every other year. And so we had about 2.5 months to change up every way of how we run a festival and figure out how to make this virtual festival happen. So thank you for being part of it. It is the first one we've done. It is a very large festival. We have 187 films on the streaming platform, plus many live events, Q&As, music, workshops, and panel discussions. I hope that you'll have a chance throughout the rest of the week to avail yourself of as many of them as you possibly can. One little housekeeping item is that every film in this festival is eligible to receive both an audience and a jury award. And you, the audience, vote in the streaming platform. So you have until 11:59 on August 1st to vote in the platform, and we hope that you will take the time to do that. We also hope that if you have the opportunity, you will be able to provide feedback and ask questions, as Jay said, through the Q&A. This is a meaningful opportunity for filmmakers to get to interact with the audience. Generally, the Q&As that we do happen after the film screening of each film as an in-person event, and so we have the ability to interact with the audience. Going forward, we anticipate that hopefully for the 30th, which is next summer, we will be back in person, but even still, we will probably have some form of a virtual festival throughout next summer and probably going forward. And then throughout the year, we also bring back films as part of our film series. So thank you very much. So Ramsey, Denison, and I, Ramsey is the filmmaker, we're going to chat for about 15 or 20 minutes. And then if there are questions in the chat, we'll start discussing the questions. So feel free to start typing them in at any time. So welcome, Ramsey. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So just a little bit of, give us a little bit of backstory. Not everyone may have seen the film yet because they can still see it throughout the festival, but how did you come to this story? I mean, it's such a chilling film.
Thank you.
Awful, not the film being awful, the story is so awful.
Yeah,
you know,
I mean, sometimes the truth is awful, right?
Yes.
And I mean, I think greed is awful, and I think greed has consumed Vegas. And I think that's why the film strikes a chord and like hits you in that way, right? It's just because it's kind of lays out the truth that, you know, the corporations have kind of made Vegas a pretty ugly place.
What brought you to this story, and how did you get to be the person to make this film?
Well, I'd made a previous feature documentary about police corruption in Las Vegas in 2017. It was called What Happened in Vegas, and that was a feature documentary. And because of that film played a lot in Vegas and got some awards there and festivals and stuff like that. And so a lot of people knew who I was from that film. And so when 1 October happened, almost immediately, a lot of the former LVMPD officers who knew me because I'd made a film exposing corruption in their department, I always thought that, you know, I'd made this expose of corruption that I was going to be like never able to go back into Vegas again. And what happened was kind of surprising. What happened was a lot of people who were part of the department actually liked what I was doing because they felt that I was pointing out corruption in the leadership, and that a lot of people felt that that was ruining the department. So those people actually became my allies. I'm talking about former sergeants and lieutenants. About 5 or 6 of these people started talking with me regularly. And so when 1 October happened, it was straight from the department, like people, former sergeants and lieutenants were getting information about what was going on in the department and how some of that was different from what Sheriff Joe Lombardo was telling the public. And they were getting that information like directly from inside the department. So that's really when I started making Money Machine, was when I found out that, you know, that the truth that was being presented to a national audience about 1 October wasn't necessarily the whole truth, and that certain things were being hidden.
How long did you work on this film from beginning to end?
I started it in October 2017, and I finished it probably around March 2020. And then but even after it was like finished, there was some developments in the legal case with the settlement for the survivors. So I went back and like added some stuff on, and that was only a couple weeks ago. So just because, you know, this happened very recently, and there's a settlement with the survivors, and so there was some new developments in that, and so I also added the whole thing about COVID, you know, and the mayor, that Anderson Cooper interview with the mayor, just because I thought it fit the theme. So I made some recent additions to it, you know, as far as a couple weeks ago. But I mean, by and large, the film was pretty much done by about March of 2020.
So obviously this is a big story in some respects. There are many characters, let's just say, a lot of moving parts. How did you decide who you're going to profile and feature, and which aspect of the story you were going to include in the film?
Well, I think the survivors started reaching out to me as well. That was the other thing. Not only people within the department who were looking to expose some of the lies, but I started hearing from some of the survivors about how callously like MGM was treating them. And so like the main woman, Catherine Thornton, who's the attorney, like she's from San Diego. She's the one who talks about like how there was blood on her shirt and stuff, and nobody noticed or cared. So she was one of those that I got in touch with. And then Chris, also the same thing. A lot of the people who were involved that night were just in shock at like the lack of regard for their, like there was this big front putting on, like Vegas cared and Vegas strong and all this stuff. And there was definitely an effort made by Vegas to make it look like they cared. But when it came right down to it, they did not. And a lot of people were shocked at the extent to which they didn't really care. And it was really just it was really about getting this out of the way as fast as possible so that Vegas could get the registers ringing again. And so there was a lot of like people who were upset about that, who were kind of, and so I was made very aware of that, not only with them messaging me, but just talking to other people. And so there was a lot of like discontent from the survivors.
So, you know, there's a lot of footage here. You shot a lot, but you also had a lot of archival footage or footage that you gathered from other places. What was your process of doing that? And did you have a team helping you do that, or did you make this on your own?
Good question. So that was actually one of the reasons the movie took a while, was because a lot of the 1 October footage from the night of 1 October, the police body cam footage that's in the movie, the LVMPD actually, I mean, that's public information. It's supposed to be made available to the public. And they prevented the release of that footage for a very long time. And so basically all the 911 calls from that night, the footage logs, the police body cam footage, they actually filed a court order to prevent that stuff coming out, which is pretty unusual given that, you know, the police work for the public, and this is like, you know, 911 calls footage. This is like public information. The public pays for the police department. So you actually had a situation where the police department that was funded by the public was using public funds to obstruct the release of the footage. Okay, so New York Times, LA Times, AP, Associated Press, I think about 7 or 8 media companies actually got together and filed this big lawsuit against the LVMPD for failing to release the documents, which we cover in the film somewhat. And they were ultimately forced to release the documents. But ultimately, they were successful because what happened was, in the footage, as you can see, there's some like LVMPD officers who were like being cowardly, you know, officers who could have stopped Stephen Paddock, etc. And in my opinion, that footage was deliberately obstructed because Sheriff Joe Lombardo had an election coming out, and you know, 1 October was on this national stage, and he couldn't be made to, you know, having coward cops on a national stage, that wasn't going to be good for his election. So it's my belief that deliberately used public funds and obstructed the release of this footage so that it didn't come out until after his election, and that's what happened. So in June, he was reelected, June of 2018, and then a lot of the footage came out after that, including like the footage of the cowardly cop. So they were kind of successful in delaying the release of the footage. Even though they eventually had to release it, it didn't, so it was really, a lot of it was about him. It was about Sheriff Joe Lombardo, and a lot of the obstruction of media was him protecting himself.
So where's the film and its release right now? Have people in Las Vegas seen it?
Well, they should have, because Freedom Fest was an event at Caesar's Palace, but it got canceled because of COVID, unfortunately. So that was supposed to be an event that happened, that was going to be in mid-July, and then it was happening, and then the COVID regulations made it such that I think in late June or early July they just called it off because they couldn't see a way to do the festival. So yeah, unfortunately that kind of it's been a weird year, Geez, what a curveball for everybody, right? So is this the first time it's being seen, film? Oh, no, the film's been seen. It started off like Cleveland International. It was streamed online there, and it's being seen. But in terms of getting it to Vegas, it's going to be a bit before it's, the thing is, we're not really sure what the end is of this COVID thing. It's hard to say. Like, is this going to go all the way through the end of the year? Or, I don't know.
Right. Nobody knows anything about that, but still, I would imagine you probably have some plans for the film. How do you think it will be distributed or released, or is that known yet?
Well, yeah, we would like to have the movie out on October 1st for the 3-year anniversary on VOD platforms. So Amazon, iTunes, etc. So we're still kind of working that out. I've had some offers, but I'm still trying to work it out. But we thought that would be the release date that made sense. Under normal circumstances, I probably would have held off longer and spent a year going around to festivals and stuff. But, COVID just threw a curveball and everything. So we're all just kind of adapting. So
do you consider the film in its final version, or do you see going back in and adding any more information if it becomes available?
Good question. I certainly always prefer not to do that, because it's nice to have a film done and to be that's done. You set it over, you compartmentalize into that thing of, okay, that. But if something compelling comes up enough, you almost have to bite the bullet and crack it open. And that's what happened with the lawsuit developments. And that, it was too big for me not to include. So yeah. So in other words, to answer your question, I prefer not to, but if it's compelling enough, then I kind of have to do it, right?
So as a filmmaker, sort of, when do you decide your general process? How do you decide what stories you're going to be involved with? And how do you decide sort of the arc of a film? Obviously there's an arc to this film because it's the story itself, but you also have particular focus and point of views. What's your process a little bit, if you can talk to us about that?
I think it's it has to be a story that you're really compelled to tell. And when I first went to Vegas in 2004, I was just really struck by the city. I was struck by kind of the gloss on the surface and the desperation underneath, and I was fascinated by it. I remember the first time I ever went to Vegas, my first moments in town, I went to the 7-Eleven and pulled over, and there was this to get a cup of coffee, and there was this girl outside the 7-Eleven with a suitcase and smudged mascara, and she was just bawling, and it looked like she just gotten beaten up or something. And it's Vegas is a lot, it's kind of the story of Vegas. It's a lot of there's all this glitz, but there's a lot of darkness underneath all that. And so that's the very first thing I ever saw in Las Vegas. And so I think ever since that moment, that always struck with me. And I think it's probably why I've been drawn to Vegas and and telling stories about it. I think I'm just fascinated by the contradiction of like the surface and the reality of it.
Yeah, and you said when this incident happened, people who you had included in your prior film reached out to you. Had you been planning to go back and tell another story about Vegas, or did you feel an obligation?
Yeah, actually, not at all. I really didn't. You know, I was surprised to the extent that my previous film kind of shook things up and got noticed in Vegas. Like, and I really didn't think that I would be safe there, and it wasn't in my plans at all to make another movie about Vegas. And so I actually kind of fought it for a while, because I wasn't sure that I would even be safe going back. But what I ended up doing was, I just took all the precautions. I would wear sunglasses, hats. I would take rental cars. I would check into the hotels in Henderson instead of Vegas, and I would check in under a friend's name. And I would do everything I could to stay on the down low, so that I could be as off the radar as possible, which I was able to do.
Who shot this with you? I mean, there's some incredible shots in the film.
I filmed a lot of it, and then I also had a guy named Evan Crane who did a lot of the really kind of stylish B-roll shots on the Vegas Strip, the slow motion stuff. So I filmed a lot of the more like documentary kind of and interview elements, and then he filmed a lot of the stuff that actually looks good. Because I'm mostly an editor. I'm not much of a shooter, but I can do the basic stuff. But most of the good stuff happened shot.
I mean, it looks really good, I have to say. So have the people who are the victims, have they seen the film yet?
Yes, a lot of them have. And I mean, meaning like, because I'll send it to them like as a Vimeo link and just say like, don't share this or whatever. And I'd originally planned on having screenings and stuff, but COVID just shut all that down. And yeah, a lot of them have just been like, wow, thank you so much for telling me this. I feel like this is our story about the reality. It's not the pretty story. It's not the story that Vegas wanted people to see, but it's the real story, So
I feel like there's a lot more too that you could have done. Not that you had the time or anything like that, but the Stephen Paddock story, I think there's a lot there.
Oh yeah. And it started in Reno. Yeah.
Started in Reno, but I mean his life before he got to that point. Tell us a little bit more about his backstory, if you can.
Yeah, I was actually kind of learning about that because I didn't know a lot. And then what happened was one of our producers, Mike Turbert, actually got in touch with Eric Paddock, his brother. And so Eric, it wasn't easy. Eric originally was just like, go away. It took months to get him. And then and we interviewed him, and I just couldn't believe a lot of the stuff from the interview. Like that was his brother really made it clear that, his brother knew him better than anybody in the world. And he made it clear that, this wasn't some random act. And MGM wanted to present it like this was a random act that had nothing to do with the way they treated him. And that was just simply false. And the reason they presented that was obvious. I mean, if it comes out that they're partly responsible for what happened here, that's not a good thing for them in terms of liability or public relations. And so one of the things we learned from Eric was that Stephen was very upset about the way he felt he'd been jerked around and used and mistreated by MGM Resorts. And not just Stephen, but just the way they treat high rollers in general, the way they play games with them, the way they kind of reel them in. And then as soon as they start making money, like boot them out and show them the door, which is the same thing that happened to Stephen Paddock in Reno. And that's actually, before he was in Vegas, he'd kind of been shown the door in Reno because he was a pretty good gambler, actually. And when they figured out that there wasn't a lot of money to be made from this guy, that he wasn't another sucker who's going to come in and blow money every day, then they started cutting off the comps. And, so that was one of the big things that I learned.
But do you think that sort of learning what you did about him I mean, this story, this incident, it's horrible, horrible incident, seems like it was really a long time in the making, right? Not maybe this particular act, but that the fuse on him had been lit a long time ago. It's not like, yeah, go ahead.
See, that's the interesting thing, is because a lot of people, when we really kind of talked to his brother, Stephen Paddock wasn't one who raised his voice. He wasn't one to throw temper tantrums. He wasn't one to like scream and yell about being mistreated by the casinos or anything. So he was a pretty like calm kind of guy. So there wasn't a whole lot forecasting that this was going to happen. You know, his brother Eric basically just said there was a lot of like kind of grumbling and bitching about how the casinos, you know, want you to step up and play, but then when you start winning, how they take things away. And nobody felt that it was on the level where he was going to do something like this. You know, that was the odd part.
Do you think that there will be any meaningful change? Maybe not particularly in the casino world, but in how people feel about going to, let's just say that after COVID is dealt with, if we can gather again in places like that, do you think that this particular massacre will make people more aware of their vulnerability in these kind of situations?
I think that MGM and Vegas in general has spent a lot of money and used their power to kind of like get people away from the truth and make Vegas look safer than it is. I think, frankly, they don't care that much about safety. I think it hasn't been a priority, and that they were successfully able to just kind of blow through this. And I don't believe there's any real long-term security changes at all. In fact, I have a friend who kept riding the service elevator, but actually it's in the film. Mike Turber kept, you know, that was where Stephen Paddock took all those guns up. Even after MGM went on their big PR thing saying that they'd heighten security and stuff, he was able to just ride up and down that lift elevator without anybody even checking his access. And so the truth is Vegas isn't secure. They want to make it look secure, but it isn't, you know, and over 200 video cameras were out that night. Of 1 October. And, you know, the bottom line is Stephen Paddock was able to get over 20 guns up there and fire on the crowd for around 10 minutes and kill 58 people, and nobody could do it. Nobody did a damn thing about it. Stephen Paddock took his own life. The LVMPD didn't do a damn thing to stop him. MGM didn't do a damn thing to stop him. They had terrible security. So I think that the reality is they failed, and they failed huge, both the police department and MGM, and they used their massive resources to kind of like spin that fact, but it's a lie.
So, I mean, as a filmmaker, did making this film change you as a person at all? I mean, it's such a hard story to be involved with for such a long time.
That's a good question.
Well, I would think it would be hard to be dispassionate about it.
What's that?
I would think it would be hard to be dispassionate and not affected by the story that you're telling, because it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Like, I mean, when you sit down with any of the 1 October survivors, and you talk to them, like, it's usually going to be after a couple. Even the ones who weren't killed that night, even the ones who didn't have injuries, and most of the people I interviewed did have injuries, but it was horrific, you know. And I mean, it changed me in terms of like my empathy for them, and like realizing how something like that you carry around for the rest of your life, which I guess I already kind of knew, because when 9/11 happened, my brother was actually living in New York City, and he worked like 2 or 3 blocks away from Twin Towers, and like watched people you know, die basically in a burning building, and that affected him for a long time. And he's a pretty stoic kind of guy. But so yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing it teaches you is just empathy for, you know, and I guess that bridges across anybody who's involved in a shooting or war, or like the wounds caused by these things are more than people can usually even probably comprehend.
Of course. So I just want to say for people in the audience, feel free to type questions in the chat, in the Q&A right now, and we'd be happy to take them. How did you get the backing to make this film, or did you just say, I'm going to go do it and we'll get the money for it later?
Well, I work in Los Angeles in the television business, and I didn't really feel like going around town trying to like raise money for, in the era we live in with cameras, equipment and stuff. I just wanted to grab the cameras and go film, and I figured if I made a good movie, it would, it would work out in the end. So I just grabbed my camera and did it. I didn't go out and try to get any money, because that was time that I could have spent filming, and I'd encourage other people to do that too. I know a lot of people in this town that spend all their time going to meetings and pitching things, and oh, we had a great meeting at HBO, and we had a great meeting at this, and then nothing happens, like after these meetings. So I think that, people who just make film, who concentrate on making films rather than going around trying to like sell ideas or get other people to back it, I'm more in that corner of doing things.
So you talked about one prior film that you made. What else? What other titles have you made?
Well, this is my second feature film. So my previous movie, What Happened in Vegas, that was my first feature. So, and I knew from that movie that if I made a good film, that it would, that there'd be a market for it and it would get distribution and stuff. So, and I had the equipment and everything. So, given my, I do a lot of editing and television and stuff. So I actually have the ability to like kind of put a lot of it together myself.
So you edited this yourself?
Every frame, yeah.
Yeah, really good, really good. I
Thank
mean,
you.
there were certain parts of it where just brought chills, just because I certainly remember and watched the news coverage of this, and so horrific to see. Who was playing when this happened? I can't remember. Who was the musician, the band?
Jason Aldean. Jason Aldean, yeah.
Did you try and chat with him in this film?
No. I figured, I figured I knew what he'd say, I mean, you're on stage and somebody, bullets start flying around. It's probably pretty scary.
Yeah, I would think so. I would think so, absolutely. And so do you think an event like this would happen today if not for COVID? Would they be back?
I think it could happen again for sure. And I think it could happen again in Vegas, because I don't think they've done anything to address the underlying issues. Mm-hmm. I think they put on a face like they did, and I think they truly haven't done a thing. And I really don't even think they care that much about the victims. I think they care about money, and it shows. I mean, when you sue victims of a mass shooting, MGM hasn't been held even remotely accountable for this. And that was one of the things that I wanted people to see in the movie, is that their greed and their lies, and that they truly couldn't have done less to either help the survivors or prevent this from happening,
So do you think that you'll keep making these kinds of films? When I say these kinds of films, I mean stories that really affect you personally and that you have a point of view about, sort of, and have a definite opinion about, as opposed to like an observational documentary that.
Probably, actually, I'm probably looking to shake it up a little bit. I made 2 like dark, harrowing Vegas exposés in a row, and I probably need to do something. Also, I mean, how many movies can you make exposing corruption in Vegas until you end up in a hole in a desert, right? So,
that would not be a good result. So, right.
So, yeah, I might do something different next time out. I'm not sure yet.
Do you think that, making documentaries, you sort of get, not pigeonholed, but you have to be able to explain what kind of film you're making in the documentary genre. Where do you think this fits in to the documentary world? Like, for example, if this were on television, if this goes to television, I guess, what kind of film do you see this as?
Probably an expose.
Yeah.
If I had to guess, expose.
And so your goal with this would be to be like, where do you see this ending up?
You know, if it can get seen and help get the message out, and you know, my last film was fortunate enough to play on television and international TV and all that stuff, and so that would be great. You know, if I can kind of do what I did with the last one and get it, you know, playing in, like, you know, internationally on TV, and also, you know, just have it get out there and get seen and have people like soak up the message of the film. I mean, that's why people do documentaries, is because they have a message and something to say. They certainly don't do it to get rich, because that pretty much doesn't happen unless your name's Michael Moore. But
So are you your own sales agent? Are you the one trying to sell the film?
no, actually, we just got a Submarine involved, so that's cool. The New York-based sales agent, so they're gonna actually rep the film. So that's big news for us. So that's a good thing.
That is great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. So audience, we have time for a couple of questions. Everybody's so shy. It's probably late. So Ramsey, are there any sort of last things that you want to talk about that we may not have covered in our conversation?
No, I think we picked it pretty clean.
All right. Well, then I'm going to say thank you so much for being with us, and just remind people that this is eligible for an award. So please remember to vote, and that you can see the films on the streaming platform for the Woods Hole Film Festival through 11:59 on August 1st, which is this coming Saturday.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for accepting the film, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. All right.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.